This is the Made for Living Well podcast, hosted by Alexa Sherm, the place to create a life well lived.
Welcome back to the podcast. We only have a few more podcasts before the new year, and a new series begins talking all about energy and your metabolism. But I didn't want to end this year without talking about some things that are really important. Of course, we've talked about sugar, but today I want to talk more about planning. And not just planning, but planning for a life you love. And I think that we get a lot of things wrong in the planning world, and we make it another to-do, another way to shame or to guilt, or another thing that just adds more stress and complexity to your life. But today, I have a special guest on the podcast that's talking about not necessarily a new way to plan, but a new outlook on life moving into the new year. She is a 3-time guest on the podcast. She is also one of my favorite authors and the author of her latest and newest book called The Unplugged Hours. Hannah Brencher is today's guest on the show, and as I mentioned, she's one of my favorite authors. She has an amazing newsletter called The Monday Club and numerous books, including her latest, The Unplugged Hours, Cultivating a Life of Presence in a Digitally Connected World. And you might be surprised to find that it's not just about giving up your phone or social media, but it's being more intentional about what you do on your phone and how you spend time outside of it. Hannah is amazing, as always, and you can learn more about her at hannahbrencher.com and also find her book on Amazon or wherever books are sold. I highly recommend it, especially moving into the new year. Now, I will make sure and link all of that up in the show notes or below wherever you're listening to podcasts in the description. And of course, you can learn more at thelivingwell.com, where I share more details into the goals I have for the new year with creating more of an unplugged routine. So you can find that again at thelivingwell.com. Now, to go along with this is a perfect time to grab your Nourish Planner. The theme of the Nourish Planner this year is the year of wellness. That's not just the year of health, but the year of wellness really signifies your entire life, mind, body, and soul. And throughout each month, I have created a health snowball where each topic builds on the next to create a wellness journey for you to go on next year that not only helps to create health, but also helps to ground and center you, really being able to come home to yourself and live more out of your true and authentic self. And I know that sounds really cliche, but I promise this is not just about creating a destination, but really creating a lifestyle of living that you enjoy and that helps create and foster the energy to get out and live your purpose. You can grab your very own Nourish Planner at thelivingwell.com. There's some great sales happening before the end of the year, so make sure you check back for those. But for now, let's get right to the show and welcome Hannah. Hannah, welcome to the show. You are literally one of my favorite people, so thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. I am so excited to have this conversation and just always love our chat. So
yeah. Well, I think this conversation, your book, The Unplugged Hours, is one of the best conversations I think we could have in the world right now, and especially in the health space. I have been doing a lot of research this year on metabolic dysfunction. And one of the things that I keep going back to is actually just this lack of creativity and this lack of inner peace and how important that really is to every single cell of our body. And I know that feels a little out there, but I do think that we're missing that and we're kind of living in this stress state all the time.
Yep.
And it's partly because of just our phones. So I want to know, first of all, when did you get this desire or this thought of, I'm going to go unplugged for a long time?
I think part of the reason why these conversations are like so hard to have is because it wasn't something that happened overnight for like any of us, right? It was like gradually, little by little, our phones, our devices, our constant connectivity started to just take up more territory. And I think it was like post-COVID that a lot of us looked around and was like, hold up, like something is off balance here. Something is not right. yet we're not given any tools on how to fix it or how to change it. And tech just keeps advancing, which gives us more reasons to be plugged in. And so for me, I think I felt all of the effects of like, I'm too plugged in. I'm feeling exhausted. I never really feel like I can refuel. I always feel like I have to be going and doing something. But it wasn't until it was 2021. It was my birthday. I was sitting in a quiet time. And I tend to like treat my birthday like a second New Year where I'm
Yeah.
like, what are the goals? What are the plans?
Uh-huh.
What can we do in 365 days? And, I was mapping out my plans, but I felt this like nudge in my spirit that just said, turn off your phone. And like, I heard it so clearly. I had not been thinking about unplugging. And that I knew in that moment, I was like, I need to turn off my phone. And it felt like it wasn't like you're just going to turn off your phone once and like get all the benefits of it, but like this is a rhythm that you need to cultivate this year. And so specifically what I did was I remember in that moment, I turned off my phone immediately. I did not turn it back on until the end of the day. But I still look back at that. Like, I think my phone was off like 10 hours that day or something. And it was the best I had felt in
Yeah.
such a long time. So when I got home from the trip that we were on, I made a tracker for myself. I looked at the year ahead. I said, okay, how could I build a rhythm? And for me, that looked like 1,000 hours in 1 year unplugged. And then little by little, I just started going hour by hour, taking my time back, reallocating my time to things that I cared about, and like learning to detach from the phone. And so I always like want to state it's like I'm not anti-phone, I'm not anti-social media. I'm not telling anybody to go like throw away your phone or live off in a commune, but I can stand on the other side of thousands of unplugged hours and say there are ways to take your life back from the phone and to rescue not just like your mind, but like body, spirit, all of it. I agree with you. It is all so connected.
Yeah. And I think it is like, it's one of those things that I find it's like another appendage. Like when it's not there, it's almost like I have like phantom,
Mhm.
like, the feeling of like, where is it? And even when I've downloaded, so like, I want to know the difference because I've done social media breaks, right?
Mhm.
This is different. This is like
Yeah.
unplugged. And I think that there is a difference that I'm not even understanding because even when I was on social media breaks, I'd look at the weather like 1,000 times during the day.
Yeah.
Like it's concerning because it proves that there's such a need almost for distraction
Yeah.
or,
Mhm.
there's a longing. So like when you first started this, what did you feel like you were actually missing? Like outside of just comparison and checking in on people on social media, like did you find anything deeper under that surface of like, I'm having a hard time relaxing in this area because my phone usually filled in those blanks for me?
Oh, yeah. When I first started, it was so uncomfortable. Like,
Yeah.
and I also wasn't telling anybody about it. I think there's like that part of us is like, I'm going to do something. So I'm going to like share it on social media and then I can like track my progress there. And I felt it was really important to do this for myself and to like learn to appreciate it for myself, which can feel a little bit like lonely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when I was first turning off my phone, I had no idea what I was doing and often wanted to be on my phone. I had experienced the same thing that you had said of like pre deciding to unplug and really track it. I would delete my social media off of my phone on like the weekends, but I always had something I was checking,
Right,
right? And be
right.
like, okay, well, if it's not social media, it's banking apps. If it's
Yeah.
not that, I'm playing this dumb game where I build this virtual house. Like I had so many things
Right.
that it was really not so much social media as it was the picking up the phone, the habit right there. But it's funny, like I think like a lot of us have done social media breaks, and I kind of compare it to like when you do something like a Whole30, right?
Yeah.
For like 30 days, you cut out all the junk, you feel amazing, you feel awesome. And then like day 30 hits and you're like pizza and wine and all the things I could not do is cultivate this as a rhythm in everyday life. Just in the same way that it's like, if I'm taking a whole foods approach, it's like, I want to learn balance. I had to learn balance, but there wasn't anything out there on balance. Even the books that I read were all about just like getting rid of it. I think all of those can be beautiful approaches, but I was like, I love social media. I run my business from social media, so I need to find that balance.
Mm-hmm. And what does that really look like in your practical everyday life? I didn't mean to get to this question so quickly, but what does that look like? Because we're extreme based, right? Like our minds love the extremes. And it's like, well, I didn't do social media, but you still have your phone. And I think this notion of unplugged, how do you make both work? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's something that I really do believe that it shifts in different seasons. I think there's probably going to be seasons where you are more plugged in or have to be on your phone more, and then seasons where you can ease off. For me, it was really helpful to designate the parts of the day that I really wanted to be present. And that was like my morning quiet time, my creative work, my time with my family, like carpool lines, things like that. And then from there, start to build those smaller habits or rhythms, you know? I set a timer and then for like the next 2 hours, I just kind of like went about doing things, read a few pages of a book, decorated a little bit for the holidays. Like it's more so I think about like, are you comfortable enough to like sit with yourself, be undistracted? And that's really uncomfortable at first, but it gets easier over time. And like now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so much more creative. I have so many more ideas. I actually work so much more efficiently because I am training myself to focus on the task that's right in front of me, to monotask within a culture of multitasking. So it does change and vary throughout the days. But I think like it's figuring out what are the things in your life that you really, really want to be present for.
Yeah, yeah. And you talk a lot about productivity in your book. And I kind of love the shift of focus when you talk about monotasking versus multitasking, because I think there is a lot of justifying that we can do of like, okay, I need my phone or I need to get all of this done. And of course, my business is run on technology. So on some level, I love it,
Yeah.
right? But I even find that too of like, I justify things because I think I need to be more productive, but you've really redefined productivity. And like, how have you found monotasking? Like, give reasons why this is a better option than multitasking.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of research out there that says that like multitasking does not work, but because like, we have done it for so long, we've convinced ourselves that it's working.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's like, oh yeah, like I can do this. A show can be on in the background. I can be clicking from browser to browser. I just found for me personally, like I kept hitting these walls in the day where I would almost be like, wait, what am I doing? Wait, where I didn't, I was in this task. How did I get over here? Like for me, like as a dreamer, as a creative doer, I always have a million ideas. You
Right.
get on social media, you have a million more ideas. You have too many ideas that you don't actually implement anything. You don't actually do anything. And so I've really seen like my creativity like go to a different level. And I've also feel like joy has come back for the work that I do. And I could honestly say a few years ago, I felt like I was just on a hamster wheel, just doing the next thing, doing the next thing, doing the next thing. But like scaling back, pulling out the noise and engaging in the task right in front of me, like I'm able to cultivate that feeling of joy of like, this is why I started. This is why I love this thing. This is why I enjoy this. Just like an example was like a few months ago, I had designated a day that I was going to like batch outline a bunch of like the Monday Club emails. It's like my weekly email that I send out every Monday. And all day, I did not do it. All day, I was in my inbox. I was over here. I was putting a fire out over here. It was like thing.
Yeah.
Like instead of just focusing on the thing in front of me. And I got to the end of the day. At that point, I was burnt out, overstimulated. I like turn off the phone. I turn off the email. I'm like, I'm just done. It's a Friday. I'm done. It didn't happen. It's a wash. I like made myself a cup of tea. I have these yellow notepads that I keep literally all over my house. I sat down, my daughter was playing, and all of a sudden, I just started to map email after email after email on the yellow notepad. I got more done in that next 90 minutes than I had done like all week. And it's a retraining of your brain, I think that we are thinking like, I need the apps, I need the things in order to be efficient. And I guess the question is like, what if efficiency is not necessarily the point? If we lose the heartbeat because we're so worried about being efficient, like that's where I think we get into a bit of a danger zone. And so it really has felt like, for me, like a reclaiming of my identity. I know that sounds crazy, but like younger me, I was so creatively charged. I was always writing in notebooks. I wrote my first book longhand on yellow notepads. Like I was so creative. And then over time, more and more connected to my phone, I lost a lot of that creativity, or I think I became very good at like doing what other people expected of me, performing in the ways they expected me to perform. And I have felt that reinvigoration, that like artist side of me come back out. And it's like hard to put it into words, but it is literally, it fills me with so much joy. Like it gives me so much peace. And I'm like, I wish I could give this to every person. I wish that every person could start unplugging to get back to the person that was there before the noise got in.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about that, like becoming the woman before kind of the internet got a hold of you, or state that so eloquently in the book. But I think about that too, even with being a mom and being in the health space of like, you get online and it's just constant chaos and comparison, and like everyone's kind of doing this, and it gets easy to get so lost in what everyone else is doing. It creates so many unrealistic expectations of, but this isn't me. And that's okay, you know, like that's okay to go back to the spaces of like, I might not mom like that person, and that's okay. That doesn't make me less of a person or a mom. And even in the health space, I think that too, of like, it's so much information that we're trying to take in that it's so easy to lose yourself in the process of, like you said, performing. So what are some things that you've noticed just in motherhood and your relationships that have really changed how you approach both of those things?
Gosh, there's like so much there. I knew that I wanted to be like a more present mom. But again, I feel like I was often comparing myself to other moms, and that was on and offline, right? And it was interesting because I feel like when I became a mom, it was almost like something got like installed in me, or maybe it was there the whole time. I'm not sure, but like this like deep knowing that like, if I want my daughter to live her best and most vibrant life, she has to see me living mine.
Yeah.
And so that has been something I have tried to cultivate from the jump. But so like, here's like the best example I would say. It's like, in my courses, I lead people through this exercise, specifically in my routine overhaul course, where I challenge them to create a list of the person they're becoming, right? Like, rather than like her goals on the internet, his goals on the internet, dig deep, unplug from the noise, ask yourself, like, who is the person that you are becoming? Then we can start to find the habits and the rhythms that go with that person, right? And so something for me that had to do with my family, it had to do with my friends, was that I was tired of being the frantic businesswoman. I was sick of it, right? Like I was a girl boss, I was hustling, all of that. But like what I did not like was that like it felt like I couldn't be intentional in the areas that really mattered to me. Like I'd be the one before a birthday party, like we got to stop by Target. We got to throw the gift in the gift bag. Like we got to show up. You know what I mean? Like it was always so frantic. And yet like I think a big part of presence is intentionality.
Mm.
And that was one of the things that I'm like, I want to be an intentional person. Like, I want to be intentionally planning things for my daughter, for her childhood. I want to be intentional with my friends and family. And like, that I would say is like one of the biggest things that has shifted in my life is that I think I have become that intentional person, like day by day, unplugged hour, like at a time. I think because I think the thing about when you unplug, you learn to pay attention. And when you learn to pay attention, you can act with more intention.
Yeah, that's so good.
And so I would say, like, whereas I told myself for so many years, like, I have this friend, Kara, and she is like so intentional. She's so good at like, you're celebrating something, she's dropping something off at the door. And I wanted that for so many years, but I always for so long made excuses as to why I wasn't doing it,
Mm-hmm.
as to why I wasn't even starting small. And like in that unplugging, I just started to show up at the doors. I just started to think about, okay, you know what? I want to be the kind of person that like when I go to a dinner party, I don't show up empty-handed. I bring something for the host. And like little by little, I started to like tweak and change like the way that I was showing up for my family, for my friends. I became way more of an intentional and hospitable person. And like that honestly like gives me so much more joy than
Yeah.
like girl bossing ever did. Like
Mm-hmm.
I still can girl boss, but like not at the sacrifice of like my everyday life feeling like chaos.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And I do think that like I love the concept of time and recognizing time is very relative to how
Mm.
we're using it. And I do think that, sometimes when we're more intentional and we're more present focus, time somehow expands, like
Mhm.
like everything you need to get done. And I think part of that is just so many of these activities are so filling and just
Yeah.
recognizing that there is an energy suck to our phones as
Yeah,
much as it
huge.
feels like it's maybe masking something. And I think a lot of us just pick it up to scroll like we would any other drug, right? Like it's just
Yep.
something to help mask whatever it is that we're feeling without really fully conceptualizing what it's also taking from us. And
Yeah.
I love how you just like map that out in so many different ways inside of the book and really just showing it in your life. I mean, you still wrote a book, Unplugged, which is, I mean, most people would be like, you can't do that, like you can't
Yeah.
do that with this, but you're doing it and you're creating a new path and you're really showing the way. And one thing that really caught my attention inside the book, I love this concept because I think it was just so easy to understand, was the tiny forks. And like, I
Yes,
think so
yeah.
much of people talk about these big forks in the road. Can you fill us in on these tiny forks? Because I think we're coming into the new year and like, those are some big forks that people are going to try and stake
Mm.
out, with
Yep.
resolutions and goals and all the things. Fill us in on where, what the idea behind tiny forks is and what that looks like in life.
Yeah, I think we can have such a hyper focus on the big forks, right? Like
Yeah.
the big forks are like, who am I going to marry? Where are we going to live? What house are we going to live in? What's the job I'm going to take? And unplugging has shown me that like so much of life is the tiny forks. Like phone or no phone, it's in everything. It's in our health, it's in our relationships, it's in our spirituality. It's all a bunch of like what I call tiny forks, which
Mhm.
is means there's a fork in the road. You're going to make a choice. What's the choice? And the inspiration for that came from like, it was right at the beginning of me starting to unplug. I was out on a date night with my husband. Our daughter was with her grandparents. And so like I knew his phone was on, so I turned mine off. I have to be very clear with like sharing that because
Yeah.
people get up in arms. People are like,
Yeah.
"You're telling me to turn off my phone?" I'm like, "No, you don't have
Mhm.
to. Sometimes I choose to, but like you can put the phone away, you know?" So on this particular night, I had my phone off because his phone was on. I had it off for the entire evening. We got to the end of the evening. I remember we were like leaving a movie theater because like that's like one of our favorite date nights. We love to go and like see a film together. We're big film buffs. And somehow a fight erupted in the car, which typically I feel like happens on date nights. I
Yeah,
don't know
right,
why.
right,
It's like you
right.
get a night off and then you're like,
Yeah.
let's fight. I know I picked the fight. I don't even remember what the fight was about, but me and Lane are different in the sense of I want to process everything, say sorry, move on. He needs time. He needs like an overnight factory reset. And so we're driving in the car and it's just silence. It's that awkward, uncomfortable silence. And I reach into my bag to grab my phone and I realized my phone was off. And it was like such a small moment, such a tiny fork, but it felt like it held so much weight in that moment of like, I have a choice right now. I'm either going to turn on my phone, start to scroll and escape all these uncomfortable feelings, or I'm going to sit in it. I'm going to sit in this discomfort. And I didn't turn my phone back on and I sat in the discomfort. And I remember even like literally like driving home and feeling really like proud in my spirit. And so it's like, that's what I mean by the tiny forks. It's like, it's a small decision. No one else is likely ever going to see. But for you, it's actually big because the more you choose the route that you want to take with the tiny forks, the more you become the person you said you wanted to be. Right. And so it comes down to like the little things of like, okay, like I really want to be a more present mom. I can either take my phone and put it in the center console while I'm going through carpool line, or I can be flipping to a million different things while my kid tries to tell me about her day.
Right.
It's those tiny forks that actually end up becoming the big stuff over time.
And I think there is a greater reward. Like when we really get into the science of pleasure, you get a dopamine hit from scrolling, right? Like we all do it because there's pleasure in it. But it's not fulfilling pleasure because it misses that personal connection, that oxytocin that I think takes away. So it's never lasting. So you have to keep going back for more. And I try to remind myself that too, of like being more present-minded with my kids is not necessarily always the easiest, right? Like we're busy and we want to disconnect and sometimes we don't want more noise coming in, but we're still taking in noise when we're scrolling. It's just different noise. And I think you have to start to see the less benefit or that there's some that have less benefits and there's some that have more benefits. And I mean, it's just like you said, it's all the little things. And I think part of it is just doing it to experience it. Because I do think it's one of those things that's really hard to rationalize because we want to justify our phone all the time. But like when you start doing it, it makes a really big difference. And I started tracking off on my little tracker that you spent time. And I think I think the holidays are a great time to do this because we have more space to do this and more ability to experience the goodness of it. But I think as we get into the new year, that's going to, like it's like a door closes and we want a new one to open as resolutions come. What are you setting as resolutions, as goals for next year in regards to this?
Oh,
you've done it. What now?
I mean, I think, I want to continue to cultivate this rhythm. It is a rhythm that I really feel like, because I was talking with a friend and she was like, well, like it must get easier over time. And I was like, not really. Like, I really think it's something you have to stay on top of. But I do feel like next year, like I want to like especially continue to like cultivate more unplugged hours within my workspace. I think it's really easy to say, okay, within the workspace, that's the time that I am plugged in. And in actuality, I'm like, I want to cultivate more of that time where it's like, there's no phone, there's no computer. It's just a notepad drafting out a blog post, I think in daily life, I want to continue to cultivate things that are just for fun, just because they feel good, no end goal. That's really hard for me. But like, even down to things like reading fiction, just because it's the book that's enjoyable, not because it's going to improve me. Right. And so I think, I think it will obviously tie into my rhythms, but for the person that's like listening, that is like, okay, I want to unplug. I want this to be something I do in the new year. What I would do is I would like take out a notepad and I would write down like the things you really want to do this year, the things you really want to accomplish. I think you will find that a lot of them do not have to do with your phone. And then like use that as the fuel for like, well, what am I going to do when I turn my phone off? Well, you are going to declutter that closet.
Yeah.
Well, you are going to like go do that workout. Well, you are going to like finally put the photos in the frames. Like make a list of big and small things you want to do. And then like little by little, like that's what I would tell you. It's like, oh, okay. Like you've said for so long, like I don't know why I keep going back to like decluttering the closet, but I think a lot of us want to declutter, but
Yeah.
like, it's like, okay, turn off your phone or put it away, set a timer, do that thing. And then when you come back, your phone is going to be right there. You won't have missed anything, but you are going to get that dopamine hit from like accomplishing something meaningful, accomplishing something that actually moves the needle. And I think that's the biggest distinction, right? It's like when we're scrolling, we feel like we're doing things, we're checking things, but we're not actually moving the needle forward. And so I want next year to just be a year of moving the needle forward. And that is going to require deep presence.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Our mind's a wild place, right? Like what we can justify as like what it picks up on. Now, you've been on the podcast before for previous books that you've written, and we've talked specifically about anxiety and your, journey with depression. How did this play a part in that? Or did it? Was this completely separate? And I mean, surely you've experienced effects of that.
Yeah,
I think we're
totally.
living in a time where we have so many people suffering with anxiety and depression. And I know when I'm feeling anxious, that's often my
Yeah.
go-to, right? Is like, just like, it feels like a disconnect, even though it never really helps. Like how do you connect these books for me?
Yeah, I definitely think we're seeing a huge correlation between, like, Jonathan Haidt is like a front runner in all of this correlation between our phones, our constant connectivity, and the depression and anxiety rates skyrocketing, right? And so I think over the next few years, like, we will just be able to solidify that. It's
Right.
just that even though we feel like social media and internet has been around for a while, it really hasn't. Like, and so we're now starting to see the ramifications and the effects of it, especially on mental health.
Yeah.
And so I think I definitely think they're correlated. I definitely think that I move through life with less anxiety and less depression, for a few reasons. I think that, like, a lot of times when we have data coming in from all areas, it's like, okay, well, I have to do that, but I have to do this, but I have to do that, but I have to do that. And then it's like when I choose to unplug, put my phone away, all of a sudden it's like this calm comes over me of like, oh, okay, I can make a list and I can slowly start to tackle that list bit by bit by bit, but I have to stop the noise from coming in. In the same way with depression, like, I feel like, it's like I had to learn to sit with myself in unplugging. I had to learn to sit in stillness. I had to learn to sit with my feelings. Like, a lot of times I would feel things because of something I would see on social media, but then I'd just move into the next thing. This discipline of unplugging has taught me to, like, when I feel a feeling, when something pops up, when a behavior is showing up that I'm like, this has shown up a lot of times before. Like, I'm actually able to take that into a quiet space, sit with it, think about it, ask God about it. Like, it's made me a much healthier person in a lot of ways. And I think that, like, I don't know, I think the more that you unplug, the more you know yourself better and you learn to find tools that actually look like self-care, right? So it's like, for a long time, I thought self-care was scrolling. I'm depressed, I'll scroll. I'm anxious, I'll scroll. I
Right.
think we've all probably done that. And it's getting to that point of like, yes, I could do those things, or I could go for a walk, or I could make a cup of tea, or I could read a book, or I could just sit and be for a second, or I could go and do something for somebody else. It's like replacing the tools in the tool belt that, like, I think have made me a much healthier person because my go-to was always scrolling,
Yeah.
like, just drowning myself in whatever was there or in more work when, like, my body, my mind, my spirit were saying, like, we need something else. We need you to, like, parent us in the way that you parent your girl,
Yeah.
right? Like, if it was left up to Novalie, she would watch Paw Patrol all day and eat chocolate all day.
Yeah,
That would be
right.
her ideal life. I, as her parent, know
Uh-huh.
in the moment that might feel good, but it's not for the long term. Like, you're not going to feel good if you do these things. So, like, let me give you the vegetables. Let me give you the sunlight. Let me give you the boundaries. But then why don't we do the same thing for
Right.
ourselves? Like, why don't we parent ourselves a little bit better to say, you know what? this isn't working right now. And like, let's try to make a tweak or an adjustment, just little things. I'm not talking about a huge overhaul. I'm really not. I'm saying, what is something kind that you can do for yourself in the next hour that feels like seeing yourself,
Right.
knowing yourself? You will be so surprised how like doing those things will end up paying dividends in other areas.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for sure. And it's funny you brought that up because I had a question on here. Like, how are you going to handle, I mean, how do you handle screen time with Novali? I always think we have screen time limits for our kids. And I always kind of giggle at that
Yeah.
because then I don't give myself them. And I'm like,
That,
and I'm always a big believer of like, you have to live it. Like your kids learn most from what you do, not necessarily what you say. And I'm like, if I don't think that they can handle it because not because they're kids, but just because we know the science of it, what makes me think that I'm bigger and better and stronger than them and can handle this, you know?
right?
Yeah.
And that's so critical to what's happening right now. Like the conversations we're having right now. Like, and I didn't even realize it. So it's like when the Unplugged Hours came out and I was doing all of like the press podcast interviews, I was like, I guess I did not anticipate how hard it would be to market this book because I've been living in my own little unplugged bubble, right? So it's like, then I start having these interviews and I'm like, oh, so we don't have a baseline. We literally don't. Literally, people do not unplug.
No. Yeah.
And the only time that we talk about the unplugging is the screen time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, but like screen time has only ever made me look at my own habits to be like, something has to shift if I ever want her to model this well.
Right.
And so yeah, I think the first thing is like putting the magnifying glass on yourself, giving yourself grace because you know that you're going to get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like a big thing for me is like cultivating what we call pockets of presence throughout the day. So like whether we're doing a project together, like whether we're going for a walk together, whether we are painting or doing a puzzle, like giving her my full attention and having her experience that rather than like all throughout the day, this like fleeting attention. But honestly, like, yeah, like I think it's a day-to-day moderation. We let her watch TV shows. She comes home from preschool and has a little half hour to unwind with a show because I know how good that
Yeah.
feels. Things that we've done in our house is like we don't have a tablet for her. We don't give her a tablet. We have a tablet that we use for road trips. But like there's no like this is my tablet. Another thing that like, we if she's going to watch something, it's going to be up on a big screen. We personally don't ever give her our phones to amuse herself, any of that. Like, so it's like, I think I started to shift my habits when I realized like her as a 1-year-old was like reaching and grabbing for my phone. And I was like, I need to start putting the phone away out of sight. But I think the most important thing is like, I needed to start doing things.
Mm-hmm.
She needed to see me doing things that were not on the phone.
Right.
And so from everything from like, doing my little turn down service at night, wrapping gifts, quiet time at the table, playing a record, making a meal. I just am trying to show up and be in my life and have her see that because that's what my mom did for me. And that's what made me feel like, oh, I could cultivate this beautiful life, but I have to be the one to build it.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be the one to cultivate it. And that's like my bigger worry with like this generation coming up is if they only ever see us on our phones, they are going to think that our lives are there.
Yeah.
And our lives are, well, for some of us, our lives are there. But like I, little by little, had to say, nope, my life is right here in the place where I'm standing apart from the phone. And if I don't like what's here, I need to rebuild it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so good. And I love how you said it's doing something, like I think so often it's like we take something away and then we're just like, well, now what? And it's like, I think we forget that so much of is I don't want to say exchanging, but we are created to go, to move. And I think there's so much that can happen in that. And I think, you painted such a good picture of like what could be done in a year if we just started to unplug, right? Okay. So I know this is like, I get questions all the time about like, how much should I eat? No, like really, how much should I eat? So don't take this as this question, but how much time a day? And I love how you said this is going to vary from day to day. Do you give yourself like on average over the course of a day, like what are you looking at for unplugged hours for yourself?
I think now that I am in more of a maintenance mode,
Mhm.
at the beginning I was tracking meticulously and I go back and forth between that. I do think I think I'll download one of my trackers for December to like be really intentional about the unplugging, but like now that I'm in more of a maintenance mode, I can generally like kind of probably in the same way as eating, right? For you, where it's like, okay, I can tell my habits have been a little off the rails. It's time to just tighten up.
Yeah.
Or like I just the other day was feeling just like I have been on my phone too much
Mhm.
today. I put the phone away. I set a timer for 3 hours. This is not something I would tell a beginner to
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
but
yeah.
like
Mhm.
I was just like amazed that in that 3 hours I just was like doing all these things that were so life-giving to me that had been there that whole time. It's just that you don't choose them when the phone is available to you. And so I would say like for like the beginner, I would think about the parts of your day that you do want to be completely present for, whether that's like more meals at the table, whether that's like at night not checking your email, whether waking up first thing in the morning, we don't have to check social media. Like we don't have to check the news. We can like wake up and allow ourselves to like have a morning routine, you
Mhm.
know? And so that would be like the biggest, like, I would say starting block is like pick a routine that you want to do completely present and then try to start to cultivate that. Not even every day. That I think that's the most important thing is that it's like you're gonna mess
Yeah.
up, you're gonna fail,
Right.
you're gonna sometimes like just feel like the whole day is a wash, but
Mhm.
you can start over again tomorrow. One of
Mhm.
the rhythms that I've implemented that makes me feel balanced for the entire week is having a weekly Sabbath. And so I used to like turn off my phone at sundown on Friday and then like get back to real life like Saturday at whenever the sun went down, like a 24-hour cycle. I still do that, but it's interesting for me that I've realized now, like as I've come to know myself better through this, is like the social media wasn't even the problem. The phone wasn't even the problem. What was actually beneath the surface was that I felt like I had to be doing something at all times to maintain value.
Mhm.
And so the bigger shift for me
Wow.
now that
Yeah.
I do a weekly Sabbath is I choose not to work in that 24 hours.
Mhm.
If I want to spend some time like drawing a bath and watching some TikTok videos, I that's completely fine. It's me having to shut off from that part of myself that says you have to create something in order to be valuable. That
Mm.
was actually the harder thing. And so I think that's like what people will realize as they start to unplug is
Mhm.
that there are behaviors and
Right.
there are reasons why you're numbing out, reasons why you're not going after your dreams, reasons why
Mhm.
you're yelling at your kids. And like that's going to be different for all of us. But the more that you unplug, the more you start to see those behaviors, and then you can start to modify those
Yeah.
behaviors.
Mhm. You just get so much more space to just understand your life, right? And
Yeah,
analyze
right.
it. Yeah. I thought about
And
that
like
too.
not in
Yeah.
a over, like not in a, I think that's like really important. It's like, I think people think, oh, she's unplugged. Like she's probably like journaling at all hours and like
Yeah.
lighting candles. And it's like, no, but I've learned now I have the tools to check in with myself throughout the day. So
Mhm.
even if it is like 5 minutes to journal, 2 seconds to like read a page while I'm in a waiting room
Yeah.
rather than scroll on my phone, it's all these little junctures of like, these are the things that make me feel like a healthy version of myself.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. The last question I have, I mean, I have a million more, but the last question I'm going to ask you now is as we're encouraging people to, make this a part of their year, to really pay attention to those unplugged hours, to be intentional with life, what are a few hurdles that you didn't expect in the process? Like, is there anything that we should be aware of that you're like, okay, I really didn't expect this, but it'd be good to know?
Yeah.
That's a big question, probably.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I do think though, like I think we've touched on it a little bit, but it's like, yeah, when you get started, it is going to be uncomfortable. We have wired ourselves to do,
Hmm.
check, check, check. And so choosing to change those habits, like, kind of does feel a bit like a detox. It feels uncomfortable. You're going to want to quit. And that's why I'm always like, have something that you want to do, right?
Yeah.
Like something that you look forward to, something that you enjoy. Um, I'm trying to think of like things that really I think like really at the root of it, like at the heart of it, what surprised me was like, I didn't even realize until I started unplugging, like how much of myself I had lost without even realizing it. Right. Like it was like in some ways, the best way that I can describe it is like the more that I unplugged, the more I felt like I was coming home to myself, like to who I really was before all that noise got in. Because I think like social media, when it first started, we were like connecting, we were like meeting people at college. It was like a connection tool. And then over time, it has become this place in which we have lived our lives. We have built brands. We've become content creators. We almost become like those little monkeys that are just performing. And it wasn't until I started stripping back the noise did I realize that's not even me. And that's not even who I want to be. And I'm chasing so hard after this destination, and it's not even where I want to get. And so that's uncomfortable, like shifting directions and changing. But like, if you can stick with it, if you can keep pushing, if you can start to like actually rebuild your life in the way that you want it built, like, man, like there's so much joy there. Like I go about my daily ordinary life experiencing so much joy so many times throughout the day that I'm like, I am living my dream life. I am living my dream life. If you had told me 5 years ago, I would have been like, no, the mundane is the stuff that we have to get through just to get to the bigger stuff. And now I'm like, I live for the mundane and I have to remind myself to like dream a little bigger, you know? So it's uncomfortable, but transformation is uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, no change is easy, right? Even if it's healthy, good change, everything that's different is always going to have hurdles.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's difficult not to fall back into the patterns of your past and like what's comfortable. So I love how you approach this of like creating new comforts, like finding new things to do. I think that's so powerful in this message of it's not just restriction, depriving, starving yourself of all these things, right? But it's like something new, something better, something that can help you grow and really doing that, taking action in that. Hannah, it has been an honor to interview you again. I love your book. I love your writing. One of my favorite authors of all time. I will make sure and link this book up in the show notes, and then a link to where they can download the Unplugged download that you have on your website. But is there anything else you'd like to share or where they can learn more about you?
Yeah, everything's at hannahbrencher.com. I'm writing there regularly. All my social media is Hannah Brencher. My goal is just to show up, encourage people, and give people tools for like more intentional living. So come and hang out.
Yes. And you also have one of my favorite newsletters, the Monday Club, which comes
Monday
out
Club.
every Monday. So I'll make sure and link that in the show notes. But thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.